What is up, everyone? Welcome into another one of our MLB DFS DraftKings Picks videos, this time for Thursday, September 9th. I am your host, Justin Bales, riding solo today with Ben Hosser getting the day off. We have a smaller 5-game slate on DraftKings, I believe a 4-game slate on FanDuel, so it's going to be very, very limited. I think the big thing that everyone's excited for, and yes, this is an MLB podcast, is that the NFL is starting tonight with the Dallas Cowboys against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I do want to quickly point a few things out before we actually get this podcast rolling. One, you can head to dfskarma.com to get all of our free content. We have tons of articles. They'll still be coming out. I just posted my NFL game theory article last night. We have some season-long stuff for fantasy football. Ben is coming out with his breakdown article, which is going to be phenomenal. It's going to be very similar to the MLB breakdown article that I do and have done throughout the year. Rube and Sam are doing a GPP leverage article. Joey has a wide receiver cornerback matchups article. So a ton of NFL content heading to the site. Also, if you want more than that, you can go to our core plays package, which you can find the link in the description below, and sign up for our NFL package along with continuing to get our MLB packages, or bundle it all together in an MVP, which gets you basically everything that we do. That's really where it's at and what you're going to want to be doing. I know that specifically for NFL, Sam has put a ton of time into the projections portal. That's also there for MLB. Again, dfskarma.com. I highly recommend checking those out for NFL and MLB. And I guess the final thing to mention is that Ben and I are co-writing a DFS Showdown article for NFL tonight as well. So you can check that out on the website. That will be free, and we will be providing showdown cores for every Thursday, Sunday, and Monday night game throughout the entire season. So that's just another reason to pick up a premium package. We really should get down to baseball with this now, though. Since this is an MLB, not an NFL podcast, those also can be found on our YouTube channel, though. So if you enjoy this content, please go ahead and give me a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications. I will have a few betting videos, one for college football. I'll be doing an NFL one as well coming out, which are more time sensitive to make sure that you get the same lines that I'm posting. So I do think that turning on the notifications makes a lot of sense for this channel. And then comment anything below, any questions, any comments, anything you want, comment, I will answer throughout the day. It is obviously only a 5-game slate, not too much going on here. My player pool is going to be very, very limited. I'll do the same thing that we do every time, which is obviously starting with pitchers, moving to stacks, and then position by position. At pitcher, there's essentially 3 guys that I'm considering. I believe 3 stand out. For FanDuel, it's really only 2 because you don't have the Mets-Marlins game. So the 3 that stand out is 1, Marcus Stroman, obviously at 9,400. He's the most expensive pitcher on the slate. It makes sense, though. The Marlins have an implied team total of only 3.3 runs. Stroman is one of the better pitchers in the MLB. The only issue is that he generally struggles with strikeouts, so the upside isn't generally there. He's a pitcher that can throw deep into the game. It's just for him to, truly hit a ceiling, he kind of has to go 7-8 innings, which, just doesn't happen all that often. I think my favorite option on the entire slate, you drop down pretty far to only 7,400 on DraftKings, is Ranger Suarez. He is finally throwing well. He's thrown well throughout the season, but he's finally getting his pitches up as a starter. And it's flashed upside, 20-plus fantasy points in 3 consecutive. Oddly enough, he only threw 71 pitches in his last game, but he's thrown right around 100 prior to that. So I'm not worried about him going really a short distance or anything in this game. He gets the matchup against the Colorado Rockies, and obviously they're playing in Philadelphia. The Rockies, just one of the worst road offenses in the MLB, probably the worst, actually. So I do think that Ranger Suarez is probably my favorite option. And then you're obviously choosing between Marcus Stroman, who we already talked about, and Huascar Yona. I think that he is one of the top options on the slate, especially at only 8,600. He's thrown well this season, kind of struggling in recent games. He hasn't topped 12 fantasy points in any of his last two, but they were one against the Giants, who we know have a pesky offense, and then two in Colorado, so I'm not overly worried about that. He does come with a lot of upside, and he gets a matchup against the Washington Nationals, which you would think is a good matchup, just based on the fact that they obviously sold so many players like Trey Turner at the deadline. But at the same time, they're one of the hotter offenses. I think they're the second hottest offense in terms of Team WOBA over the last 14 days on this slate. So, I mean, there is a little risk involved in this. They're not striking out at an overly high rate. But at the same time, I'm not overly worried about it. That's likely my player pool, those three pitchers, which kind of crazy for an MLB slate to only have three options. But it is what it is. I think if you want to get weird and go somewhere else, it's probably Jesus Luzardo or Carlos Hernandez. I don't really love either of those two options, though. So I'm probably just sticking with the three that I named that I like, and then moving on. In terms of stacks, I think it's pretty clear cut that the Atlanta Braves against Eric Fedde are the top option. Their implied run totals over one run higher than the next closest. So it would make sense that they're chalk. I think that's pretty clear cut where you're going, especially with the ability to spend down on someone like Ranger Suarez at pitcher. And actually probably that you more or less need to, unless you're going to play Yona and Stroman together, which viable, but probably not the way that I would want to go about doing this. So if you're not using Atlanta, who is just the clear-cut chalk on this slate, I think that a few options make sense. Toronto Blue Jays against Nestor Cortez. I do like Cortez, but it's just a bad matchup against the Blue Jays there. And then the Philadelphia Phillies against Antonio Senzatella. Senzatella actually isn't throwing that bad this season. He's just also not great. So I believe those are probably the top two spots that you want to attack. And then realistically, you can use either side of the Kansas City-Baltimore game. And you can use someone like the Mets against Luzardo just because he's not throwing at a high level or anything at the moment. But for me, I think in cash games, you probably look at Atlanta. And then after that, the Phillies would probably be my number one, followed by Toronto, and then most likely Kansas City, I think, just because you get the home run potential against John Means. Before we move to position by position, I do want to quick shout out our partners, Jock Market, especially with the NFL season coming around. It's basically stocks meet daily fantasy. We've had a lot of success with it. It's really fun. Essentially, what you do is you buy shares of players. There's a certain amount of shares of specific players. And then based on how they do on that specific slate, you get paid out. So say you buy, let's just keep it really simple, one share of, Charlie Blackmon for $5, and he finishes as the highest scoring player on the slate. You win $25 for that share, so you would profit $20. I mean, it's pretty simple. If you want free advice for it, we're giving it out in our Discord, chatdfs.com. Essentially, just download the app. It's JOCKMKT. Use the promo code KARMA to get a 100% deposit bonus up to $50. And that would give you $100 to mess around with, which is more than enough, at least early in your jock market careers. And with NFL coming, it's just going to be a fantastic opportunity because you can also sell players or buy players in the middle of games, depending on if they're doing well or not doing well, which gives you an edge over other people. So I do believe that Jock Market is a great app. I've had a lot of fun playing it so far. But with that being said, let's move on to the position by position. I think catcher is relatively simple. You're probably just playing Travis d'Arnaud. If you don't want to use him, I think you move up to either Sal Perez or JT Realmuto. If you're spending down, Danny Jansen, assuming he's in the lineup, is probably the best option. I will say the guy that kind of sticks out a little bit, just in terms of home run potential, And for his price tag, James McCann, assuming he's starting, is 3,100 and gets a matchup against a lefty that struggled with home runs. So his power could be on full display. I think realistically, though, it's pretty clear that d'Arnaud is the top option, specifically in cash games, unless you can get up to someone like Sal Perez, who is just playing extremely well and gets the plus matchup against John Means. At first base, very clear Freddie Freeman. You're going to want to make him a priority. I think he is the most expensive first baseman on the slate, but he's someone that you definitely have to prioritize. Outside of that, I have no issues with multiple players here. If you want to go to Vlad Guerrero Jr., just kind of as a pivot off of Freddie Freeman, I'm fine with that. Ryan Mountcastle at 4,400 and Trey Mancini, assuming he's in the lineup, at 39, feel a little too cheap. Brad Miller at 4, even Pete Alonso at 4.8. I have no problems with any of them. And then if you want to kind of take your shot, I don't necessarily think this is a spot that I would do it. But at 4,300, CJ Cron gets a matchup against left-handed pitching, and obviously he comes with a lot of power. And I would assume that Ranger Suarez is one of the higher-owned pitchers tonight. So it gives you a little bit of leverage there if you aren't going to use Suarez. Second base, very clear-cut, Ozzie Albies. I mean, it's going to be a lot of Braves. There's only 5 games. There's only realistically so much that you can outline. I think you pay up for this position. If you don't go Albies, I think Marcus Semion's probably the next top option, followed by Gene Segura. All of them over 5,000. If you need to spend down, I think at 2,200 or 2,400, Jones and Mateo, assuming they're both in the lineup for Baltimore, either of them makes sense. I do believe you can play someone like Javier Baez at 4,700. Whit Merrifield, again, he's over 5,000. Even someone like DJ LeMahieu, but I don't necessarily think you have to go that way. Just with Jose Barrios on the slate, and there's a few bad pitchers, so I don't think you necessarily need to attack Barrios. But at 4,200, I do think that LeMahieu's at least viable. At third base, I think my top option would be Jonathan Villar. You could make a case for Austin Riley, but Villar's 1,300 cheaper. Also gets the plus matchup against Luzardo, so I'm not overly worried about it. If Ramon Urias is starting, he's under 3,000 and gives you great salary relief. Kevin Smith is the min price. And then you have Adalberto Mondesi, if I could say his name, at 4,500 against John Means. All of them make fantastic options on this slate, which is kind of weird because generally there aren't many third basemen that I like, even on like the 15-game slate, so that's kind of crazy. I think at shortstop, you do have the ability to pay up if you do. Dansby Swanson, obviously, for Atlanta, or Bo Bichette are my top 2 options. I believe they're the only 2 above 5,000, but if you're spending up in the high 4s or anything, I do think that that's the way to go. If you're not, you could take Didi Gregorius at 4,000. I know he's been having a really down year, but he gets the solid matchup against Senzatella. Or if you're fine going lefty-lefty, Nicky Lopez is still only 3,500. He just gets a left-handed matchup against John Means. So a little bit more risk there, but he's been hitting second in the lineup regardless, even against left-handed pitching. And Lopez obviously comes with quite a bit of speed, stolen base potential, and he's still hitting around 350 over his last 10 games. So I do think that at 3,500, Lopez is a little bit too cheap if you need to find a little bit of salary relief on this slate. In the outfield, Jorge Soler is still way too cheap. If you want basically a min price guy who is leading off, Brett Gardner is expected to lead off for the Yankees. He's only 2,300. You have the Phillies guys, Bryce Harper, Odubel Herrera, both extremely expensive. You have McCutchen, who's a little bit cheaper. All of them make sense. I do think you can use like Adam Duvall or Jock Peterson, depending on whether they crack the starting lineup or not. I think they're completely fine. Cedric Mullins is probably one of my favorite options for only 4,700. That's just way too cheap. And then if George Springer gets in the lineup, 4,900 is actually surprisingly cheap. It's 200 cheaper than someone like Odubel Herrera, who obviously, George Springer has much more upside in that situation. And then I think you can use a guy like Austin Hayes, been on fire. I have no problems whatsoever with using someone like that. Kevin Pillar as salary relief, Michael Taylor, depending on where they sit in the lineup, make a lot of sense. But as always, there's a decent amount of outfield options. I think Cedric Mullins is probably my favorite for his price, or Jorge Soler, followed by George Springer, assuming he gets in the lineup. And then, the Phillies guys, if you really, really just have extra money to spend up on. But that about does it for what we're looking at today for MLB, with it only being a 5-game slate. Also, lock is at 640 on DraftKings for anyone wondering that. I will give a quick home run call prior to getting off of here. I'm going to stick with the catcher. I generally give out home run calls for catchers. It's really weird, but it's been really successful this season. And I'm going James McCann. I think this is kind of the perfect matchup for him to display that power, and he's still a bit too cheap. So James McCann is my home run call. Once again, all of our content can be found on dfskarma.com. You can also just go in the description below and find everything that you possibly need, all the links and everything. So feel free to do that. We hope to see you guys in our Discord, chatdfs.com to 100% for free. Get in. And in our premium channels, specifically for NFL, MLB. All of it is great. We're riding out the rest of the season. It's been outstanding. We're all very excited for NFL to start. But until then, hit the subscribe button to this channel. Turn on the notifications so you don't miss anything that we're doing. And good luck tonight.